The morning sun, a benevolent giant, stretched its golden fingers through the high windows of Fort Campbell's main gymnasium, illuminating a scene of vibrant celebration. Banners proclaiming "Congratulations, graduates," swayed gently in the manufactured breeze of the air conditioning, a stark contrast to the stifling summer heat baking the asphalt outside. The air hummed with the anticipatory buzz of families gathered, their faces a mixture of pride, relief, and nervous excitement. A symphony of rustling programs, whispered conversations, and the occasional excited shriek of a toddler pierced the otherwise reverent atmosphere. Amidst this kaleidoscope of human emotion, Major Diana Fortress Johnson entered, a figure of quiet authority. Her uniform, impeccably tailored and adorned with rows of ribbons and medals that glinted in the sunlight, spoke of a career etched in dedication and sacrifice. Each meticulously placed decoration whispered tales of deployments weathered, battles fought, and victories hard won. Beneath this stoic facade, a current of maternal pride flowed, warming her from the inside out. "My boy," she thought, her heart swelling with an almost overwhelming affection. "My Michael." She scanned the rows of chairs, searching for the familiar face that anchored her to this moment, to this place. The gymnasium scale dwarfed her, a testament to the countless individuals who had passed through these doors, each carrying their own hopes and dreams. The gymnasium hummed with anticipation. A sea of crisp blue uniforms, starched and sharp, rippled with nervous energy. The air thrummed with the low murmur of conversations, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. The scent of polished leather and floor wax hung heavy, a familiar aroma that Diana Fortress Johnson had inhaled countless times throughout her career. It was a scent that, until this moment, had always brought a sense of belonging, of shared purpose. Now, it felt tainted, laced with a creeping unease. She clutched her son's graduation invitation tighter, the embossed paper a small comfort against the tremor in her hand. "Just get through this," she told herself. "See Michael graduate. Then you can leave." But the tremor persisted, a subtle betrayal of the outward composure she fought to maintain. Diana smoothed down her own uniform, the familiar weight of the fabric a source of both pride and, now, a strange vulnerability. The 3 gleaming stars on her shoulder felt heavy, almost burdensome. Her gaze swept over the crowd, searching for her son's face among the sea of young cadets. A surge of maternal pride battled with a rising tide of irritation. This should be a joyous occasion. Why did this gnawing feeling of wrongness persist? "Ma'am," the voice, tinged with suspicion, sliced through the celebratory buzz. Diana turned to face 2 security guards. The older one, Chuck, his name tag proclaimed, held himself with a cautious stiffness, his eyes darting between Diana and her uniform. The younger one, Tony, radiated an aggressive confidence that bordered on arrogance. He looked like he'd swallowed a rule book and was now ready to regurgitate it on anyone who dared step out of line. Diana's internal monologue accelerated. Of all the times, surely this is a misunderstanding. She forced a polite smile. "Yes. Just need to see some ID, ma'am." Tony's words were clipped, his tone implying that he expected a fight. Diana sensed Chuck's unease, the subtle shift of his weight, as if preparing to intervene. But the younger man's aggressive stance dominated the space between them. Diana's smile wavered. This was absurd. Still, she reached for her military ID, presenting it with a practiced, fluid motion. "This will be over quickly." Tony snatched the ID card, holding it up as though it were contaminated. He scrutinized it with exaggerated care, his lips moving as he read. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Chuck leaned in, peering over Tony's shoulder. A palpable shift in the atmosphere occurred, a ripple of awareness spreading outwards from the small tableau they had created. Diana felt the weight of the surrounding gazes, the silent questions hanging in the air. "This is, are you kidding me?" Tony's voice dripped with disbelief, bordering on mockery. He looked up at Diana, his expression a mixture of contempt and suspicion. "That's obviously fake." A cold anger began to coil in Diana's gut. Years of discipline held it in check, but her voice held a steel edge. My identification is legitimate. Military impersonation is a federal crime, ma'am. Tony's words hung in the air, each syllable punctuated by the growing silence of the surrounding crowd. Diana could practically taste the judgment in the air, thick and cloying. The initial excitement of the event had been replaced by a tense, expectant hush. How dare he? Diana raged internally. After everything I've done for this country, she took a deep breath, fighting to maintain her composure. This was not the time or the place. I assure you, I am Major Diana Fortress Johnson. I'm here for my son's graduation. Tony scoffed, his expression a mask of disbelief. Right? And I'm the president. Chuck shifted uneasily beside him, his gaze flickering nervously towards the gathering crowd. Diana felt a surge of humiliation, hot and stinging. The whispers started then, soft and insidious, like a swarm of insects buzzing around her. She saw the doubt in the eyes of the onlookers, the subtle shift in their postures. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. This can't be happening. Her carefully constructed composure began to fray at the edges. This was not just about her anymore. It was about Michael, about his special day. Suddenly, a booming voice cut through the tension. What the hell is going on here? 12 figures in Navy SEAL uniforms emerged from the crowd, their presence radiating an aura of quiet power. At their head stood Commander Marcus Steele Thompson, his face a mask of controlled fury. He strode towards Diana, his eyes locking onto hers with a mixture of concern and recognition. Behind him, the whispers intensified, morphing into confused murmurs. A wave of relief washed over Diana, so intense it almost buckled her knees. She had never been so grateful to see a familiar face. Diana? What's the problem? Marcus's voice, though low, carried an unmistakable authority that silenced the surrounding whispers. Before Diana could respond, a figure pushed through the throng of SEALs. Major Johnson? Is that really you? It was Master Sergeant Rodriguez, retired, his face etched with disbelief and dawning recognition. He snapped to attention, offering a crisp salute. It's an honor, ma'am. The two security guards stared, mouths agape, as the scene unfolded before them. The realization of their monumental error began to dawn on their faces, paling their already ashen complexions. Marcus turned to the guards, his voice dangerously low. Care to explain why you are harassing a decorated war hero? The ensuing explanations were a jumble of stammering apologies and half-truths. Tony's bravado had evaporated, replaced by a look of abject terror. Chuck, looking significantly older than he had moments before, hung his head in shame. As the truth of Diana's identity and her impressive military record unfolded, the atmosphere in the gymnasium shifted yet again. The murmurs of doubt transformed into expressions of awe and respect. A wave of apologies rippled towards Diana, heartfelt and sincere. The initial humiliation was replaced by a quiet pride, a sense of vindication that ran deeper than the bone. She had faced down enemies on foreign soil, endured hardships that most could only imagine, and yet this moment, this absurd accusation in the midst of a celebration, had felt like one of the toughest battles she had ever fought. She met her son's gaze across the room. He stood tall, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. In that moment, all the frustration, all the humiliation faded away. She was here. She was his mother. And that was all that mattered. The gymnasium air, thick with the scent of floor wax and nervous anticipation, crackled with a strange new energy. Diana felt the shift, a subtle ripple in the crowd's collective breath, like a predator's shadow passing over prey. She stood her ground, spine ramrod straight, the weight of her dress uniform suddenly heavy, a physical manifestation of the invisible pressure bearing down. They think this is a game, she thought, the words forming icy crystals in her mind. They think this uniform, this life, is a costume I can simply shed. Chuck Morrison shifted uneasily, the starched collar of his security uniform suddenly feeling like a noose. The woman's unwavering gaze unsettled him, a quiet strength radiating from her that belied the situation. His partner, however, remained unmoved, a smirk twisting his lips. "Look, lady," Tony Ritchie sneered, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the vast gymnasium. "We've been polite. Take off the costume, or we'll have to escort you out." Each word felt like a small, sharp stone flung at Diana's carefully constructed composure. She registered the murmurings of the crowd, a wave of whispers that threatened to drown out the steady rhythm of her own heart. "Escort me? From my son's graduation? They dare. I'm not causing any distraction," Diana stated, her voice even controlled. Internally, a storm raged. Years of discipline wrestled with the primal urge to lash out, to defend not just her uniform, but the very essence of her being. This uniform, these medals, they weren't just fabric and metal. They were etched into her skin, woven into the fabric of her soul. "This whole charade is a distraction," Tony countered, stepping closer, his hand hovering near his belt. The implied threat, however small, was enough to ignite a spark of fear in Chuck. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A simple uniform check, a routine procedure. How had it spiraled into this? He opened his mouth to speak, to try and de-escalate the situation, but the words caught in his throat. He felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. The crowd, initially a sea of murmuring faces, began to coalesce into distinct individuals. Some whispered amongst themselves, casting speculative glances at Diana. Others openly stared, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. A young woman, her face pale with a mixture of fascination and fear, held her phone aloft, the small red light indicating that the scene was being recorded. The digital eye, Diana knew, was a double-edged sword. It could be her salvation or her condemnation. Diana felt a strange detachment, as if she were observing the scene from a distance. The gymnasium, the crowd, the two guards, they all seemed to fade into the background, their voices muted, their movements slowed. Her focus narrowed, laser-like, on a single point in the distance. Her son, Michael, standing amongst his fellow graduates. His face, though partially obscured by the sea of blue uniforms, was a beacon, a reminder of why she was here, why she was enduring this humiliation. For him, suddenly, a voice cut through the tension, a voice that carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "All right, playtime's over." The words were quiet, almost conversational, yet they commanded attention. Diana felt a surge of something akin to hope, a fragile tendril pushing through the ice that had encased her heart. A man in civilian clothes, his bearing undeniably military, approached. His movements were economical, precise, his gaze sharp and assessing. He stopped a few feet from the guards, his eyes flicking between them and Diana. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Chuck Morrison, desperate for a lifeline, stumbled over his explanation. "Sir, this woman, she's wearing. We think it's—" Tony Ritchie, never one to back down, interrupted. "Impersonating an officer, sir. We asked her to remove the uniform, but she's refusing to cooperate." He puffed out his chest, trying to project an air of confidence, but his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. The newcomer's gaze remained fixed on him, a silent, unwavering pressure that began to chip away at his bravado. Before Tony could continue, a distant rumble echoed through the gymnasium, growing steadily louder. The crowd parted, revealing a group of figures approaching at a brisk pace. 12 men, clad in Navy SEAL uniforms, their faces grim, their movements synchronized with a precision that spoke of years of training. At their head walked a tall, imposing figure, his eyes fixed on Diana. Commander Thompson, the man in civilian clothes, acknowledged, a hint of respect in his voice. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, retired, he added, extending a hand towards Diana. Recognition sparked in her eyes. Rodriguez, a legend, a man whose exploits were whispered in hushed tones within the special operations community. Diana's heart began to beat a little faster. This was changing. Everything was changing. Commander Thompson stopped before Diana, his gaze sweeping over her uniform, lingering on her medals. He snapped a sharp salute. "Major Johnson," he said, his voice resonating with respect. "My apologies for the inconvenience." The two security guards stared, mouths agape, their faces draining of color. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that echoed through the gymnasium. The young woman with the phone, her hands still recording, looked as if she might faint. Diana returned the salute, a flicker of a smile playing on her lips. Inconvenience, she thought. That's one word for it. But the relief that washed over her was so profound, so overwhelming, that it momentarily stole her breath. She glanced at her son, his face now beaming with pride. It was enough. It was everything. The next few minutes were a blur of apologies, explanations, and hushed conversations. The two guards, their bravado completely evaporated, stammered out their excuses, their faces a mixture of shame and fear. Tony Ritchie, his earlier arrogance replaced by a palpable sense of dread, even offered to shine her shoes. Chuck Morrison simply stood there, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. The weight of his mistake, Diana saw, was crushing him. The crowd, now buzzing with excitement, began to disperse, their whispers replaced by open expressions of admiration and respect. The young woman with the phone, her eyes wide with disbelief, continued to record, capturing the aftermath of the confrontation, the humbled guards, the proud commander, and the quiet dignity of Major Diana Fortress Johnson. The video, Diana knew, would go viral. And for once, she didn't mind. The gymnasium air, thick with the scent of polished floor and nervous anticipation, crackled with an unspoken tension. Diana Fortress Johnson stood her ground, the crisp lines of her dress uniform a stark contrast to the swirling chaos around her. Chuck Morrison, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the initial certainty in his eyes now clouded with doubt. Beside him, Tony Ritchie, younger, brasher, felt a tremor of unease snake up his spine. The crowd, initially a murmuring mass, had grown silent, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. Diana met their gazes, a flicker of steel in her own. They think they can strip me of my identity with a few misplaced words, she thought, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. They don't know the battles I've fought, the scars I carry. The man who had intervened, a figure of quiet authority with the weathered face of a seasoned soldier, held up a hand, his voice cutting through the silence. "Major Diana Fortress Johnson," he stated, his words resonating with a conviction that made the two guards flinch. He pointed to the small, silver star pinned to Diana's jacket, his finger unwavering. "Do you know what this is?" Chuck swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He'd seen that medal before, in documentaries on the chests of heroes. Doubt gnawed at his insides. He glanced at Tony, searching for reassurance, but found only a reflection of his own growing apprehension. That's a silver star," he stammered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The retired master sergeant, his name Rodriguez, nodded slowly, his eyes boring into Chuck. "And do you know what it takes to earn a silver star?" His voice, though calm, held a weight that pressed down on the two guards. Tony, his face flushed, opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He had boasted to Chuck about his military knowledge, about his uncle who had served. Now, that bravado felt like a flimsy shield against the rising tide of shame. Rodriguez turned to the crowd, his voice gaining strength. "Folks, this woman is a genuine American hero. Major Diana Fortress Johnson, the Diana Johnson who saved 37 soldiers in Kandahar." A ripple went through the crowd. Whispers, then murmurs, then a wave of incredulous gasps. The story of Kandahar, though years old, was etched in the collective memory of the nation. A desperate firefight, a trapped unit, a single medic who braved enemy fire to pull her comrades to safety. The name Diana Johnson, though rarely spoken in the media, was whispered with reverence in military circles. Diana stood still, a storm of emotions raging within her. Pride warred with anger, the urge to lash out battling the ingrained discipline of years in service. She had never sought recognition, had always preferred the quiet solace of anonymity. But now, standing under the weight of these gazes, she felt a strange sense of vindication. They tried to diminish me, she thought, a spark of defiance igniting in her eyes. They tried to erase my service, my sacrifice. The two guards, now the focus of the crowd's disapproval, shrank under the collective gaze. Chuck, his face pale, felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had been so sure, so quick to judge. He looked at Diana, her quiet dignity a stark rebuke to his rash actions. Shame burned in his chest, hot and suffocating. Tony, his youthful arrogance shattered, stared at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the crowd. He had wanted to impress, to assert his authority. Now, all he felt was a profound sense of humiliation. He had insulted a hero, a woman who had faced down death and emerged victorious. Suddenly, the sound of boots hitting the gymnasium floor echoed through the space. A group of men, 12 in all, entered the gymnasium, their movements precise and synchronized. They wore the distinct uniform of the Navy SEALs, their presence radiating an aura of quiet power. At their head was a tall, imposing figure with the bearing of a seasoned commander. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the room, settling on Diana. A flicker of recognition, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Diana," he said, his voice carrying over the hushed whispers of the crowd. "I see you're still causing a stir wherever you go." Diana met his gaze, a small smile playing on her lips. "Marcus," she replied, her voice steady. "Always a pleasure." Commander Marcus Steele Thompson, a friend from her days in Afghanistan, turned to the crowd, his voice commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This is Major Diana Fortress Johnson, a highly decorated war veteran and a personal friend. I can assure you, her credentials are impeccable." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound that washed over the gymnasium. The two guards, now completely dwarfed by the unfolding events, looked at each other in stunned silence. Chuck, his head bowed, felt a tear roll down his cheek. He had made a terrible mistake, one that he would never forget. Tony, his face a mask of shame, wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the weight of his actions. Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand to Diana. "It's an honor, Major," he said, his voice filled with respect. Diana shook his hand, a quiet pride filling her chest. She glanced towards the graduating class, searching for her son. Michael, his eyes wide with a mixture of pride and disbelief, met her gaze. In that moment, the humiliation, the anger, the frustration faded away. She was a soldier, a mother, a hero. And that was all that mattered. The air in the gymnasium crackled, a strange mix of residual tension and dawning awe. The two security guards, Chuck Morrison and Tony Ritchie, stood as if rooted to the spot, their faces a canvas of conflicting emotions: shame, disbelief, and a burgeoning fear. Chuck's hands trembled slightly, the realization of his blunder hitting him with the force of a physical blow. Fool! He berated himself internally, absolute fool, to question a woman of her caliber. He glanced sideways at Tony, whose youthful arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a stark pallor. The boy looked as though he might be sick. Chuck could almost feel the frantic scramble of Tony's thoughts. Mirroring his own, how could we have been so wrong? The arrival of the 12 Navy SEALs had been like a scene from a movie, a silent, coordinated influx of power that shifted the very atmosphere of the room. They stood in two rigid lines, their presence radiating an almost tangible aura of discipline and strength. At their head stood Commander Marcus Steele Thompson, his gaze fixed on Diana, a mixture of respect and concern etched on his face. The silence that had fallen over the gymnasium was thick, heavy, punctuated only by the quiet rustle of uniforms and the sharp intakes of breath from the onlookers who had gathered. Diana stood tall, her posture unwavering despite the emotional turmoil that churned within her. The initial sting of indignation had subsided, replaced by a weary resignation. She had faced far worse on the battlefield, face down enemies who sought to destroy her, to break her. This was a different kind of battle, a fight against ignorance and prejudice, a fight she hadn't anticipated having to wage on her son's graduation day. So this is what it feels like to be judged by the uniform, not by the person within it, she thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat. Yet a flicker of pride also ignited within her, fueled by the unwavering support of the SEALs who stood before her, a testament to the bonds forged in shared service and sacrifice. Major Diana "Fortress" Johnson. Commander Thompson's voice resonated through the gymnasium, cutting through the silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Every head turned towards him, towards her. Diana met his gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared understanding that transcended words. "Commander Thompson," she replied, her voice steady, controlled. She could feel the weight of the gazes upon her, the whispers rippling through the crowd. The whispers, however, were different now, no longer laced with doubt or accusation, but with a newfound respect, a hesitant awe. "We came as soon as we heard you might be here, Major," Commander Thompson continued, his voice laced with a quiet intensity. He took a step closer, his eyes scanning the faces of the two security guards. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding." Diana watched the two men flinch under Thompson's gaze. Chuck swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words caught in his throat, a jumble of incoherent sounds. He had never felt so small, so insignificant. Beside him, Tony shifted uneasily, his face a mask of shame. "You just attempted to remove one of the most decorated female veterans in this country from a military graduation ceremony." Commander Thompson's voice was low, controlled, yet the underlying steel was unmistakable. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The silence that followed was deafening. Chuck could hear the frantic thumping of his own heart, the rush of blood in his ears. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to become invisible. He finally managed to stammer, Major Johnson." "No." Diana looked at him, her gaze piercing. She saw the fear in his eyes, the genuine remorse. She saw the man behind the uniform, the man who had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. She had seen men break under far less pressure, crumble under the weight of their own guilt. But this man, despite his fear, held her gaze. And in that moment, Diana understood. He wasn't inherently malicious, just blind. Blinded by his own preconceived notions, by the ingrained prejudices that society often subtly, insidiously perpetuates. "It's understandable," Diana said, her voice surprisingly calm, even gentle. The words seemed to hang in the air, a stark contrast to the tension that still permeated the gymnasium. Chuck stared at her, dumbfounded. He hadn't expected forgiveness, not after what he had done. He had braced himself for the reprimand, the public humiliation, the inevitable consequences. But this was unexpected. Tony, emboldened by Diana's unexpected leniency, finally found his voice. "Major Johnson," he began, his voice trembling, "I am so incredibly sorry. I let my own ignorance cloud my judgment. I should have known better." The words tumbled out in a rush, a torrent of regret and shame. He looked at Diana, his eyes pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. Diana simply nodded, her gaze shifting towards the entrance of the gymnasium. Her son, Michael, stood there, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of confusion and pride. He had witnessed his mother's humiliation, but he had also witnessed her strength, her unwavering dignity in the face of adversity. And now, he was witnessing the respect she commanded, the deference shown to her by the very men who had moments before questioned her right to be there. A small smile played on Diana's lips. She thought, this is the lesson I want him to learn. That true strength lies not in the uniform you wear, but in the character you possess. The tension in the gymnasium began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of anticipation. The graduation ceremony was about to begin. The incident, though unpleasant, had inadvertently become a powerful statement, a silent testament to the importance of looking beyond the surface, of recognizing the individual beneath the uniform, of respecting the sacrifices made by those who serve. The announcer's voice boomed through the gymnasium, calling the graduating class to attention. The ceremony was about to commence. A new chapter was about to begin. And for Major Diana Fortress Johnson, a new understanding, a quiet, profound sense of peace settled within her. She had fought her battles, both on and off the battlefield. And today, she had won. The gymnasium buzzed, a hive of anticipation and pride. The air vibrated with the low murmur of conversations, the rustle of dress uniforms, and the occasional excited squeal of a child. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, painting dust motes dancing in the air like celebratory confetti. Major Diana Fortress Johnson stood a little apart from the throng, her hands clasped loosely before her. The crisp fabric of her uniform felt strangely unfamiliar after years of civilian clothes, yet also felt like coming home. My son is about to graduate. The thought resonated within her, a quiet hum of pride against the backdrop of the bustling gymnasium. She'd missed so much, the years stolen by deployments and recovery. But this moment she wouldn't miss for the world. The ceremony began, the familiar cadence of military protocol unfolding around her. The air crackled with formality, yet beneath it, Diana sensed a palpable shift. The whispers that had followed her earlier, laced with suspicion and judgment, were now replaced by murmurs of respect, awe. She could feel the weight of their gazes, no longer accusatory, but filled with a newfound understanding. It wasn't the kind of attention she sought, but it was a stark contrast to the humiliation of minutes before. It was a vindication, not for herself, but for the silent battles fought by so many unseen. The base commander stepped onto the podium, his voice booming through the gymnasium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special honor today." Diana's breath hitched. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The commander's gaze swept across the crowd, finally landing on her. A small, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. He proceeded to recount her service record, the battles fought, the sacrifices made. Each word was a hammer blow against the wall of ignorance that had almost kept her from witnessing her son's triumph. Diana stood there, her spine rigid, her expression carefully neutral. Inwardly, a storm raged. Humiliation warred with pride, anger with relief. They know now. The realization was a strange mix of bitterness and satisfaction. It shouldn't have taken this public dissection of her life, for them to see her worth. But perhaps a small voice whispered within her, perhaps this was necessary, not just for her, but for all the others who wore their scars unseen. The ceremony continued, the commander's words echoing in the vast space, each syllable a testament to a life dedicated to service. Diana felt a strange disconnect, as if she were watching a movie about someone else. Her gaze drifted towards Michael, standing tall and proud amongst his fellow graduates. His eyes met hers, a flicker of shared understanding passing between them. In that moment, all the struggles, all the sacrifices faded into insignificance. This was why she was here. This was what mattered. As the ceremony concluded, a wave of people approached her, their faces etched with a mixture of admiration and apology. "Thank you for your service, Major," they murmured, their words sincere, their eyes filled with respect. Diana nodded, accepting their gratitude with a quiet dignity. The apologies, though well-intentioned, felt hollow. They couldn't erase the sting of the earlier accusations, the casual dismissal of her identity. Yet, she also recognized the genuine remorse in some of their eyes, the dawning understanding of the assumptions they had made. Perhaps, just perhaps, this incident would plant a seed of change, a reminder to look beyond the surface, to recognize the quiet heroes who walked among them. Chuck Morrison approached, his face pale, his eyes filled with shame. He stammered an apology, his voice barely a whisper. Diana looked at him, her gaze unwavering. She saw not malice, but ignorance, a blind adherence to rules without considering the human cost. She nodded curtly, accepting his apology without words. Forgiveness, she knew, was a journey, not a destination. Tony Ritchie followed, his youthful arrogance replaced by a palpable sense of regret. He too apologized, his words more forceful, more earnest. He offered to explain, to justify his actions, but Diana held up a hand, silencing him. "Actions speak louder than words," she said, her voice low but firm. He flushed, understanding dawning in his eyes. The reprimand he and Chuck received was swift and public, a stark reminder of the consequences of their actions. It was a small price to pay for the humiliation they had inflicted, but Diana felt no sense of triumph, only a weary resignation. Commander Thompson and his SEAL team, still radiating an aura of quiet power, stood a little apart, observing the scene. They had served as silent witnesses, their presence a powerful statement of solidarity. Diana exchanged a brief, knowing look with Thompson. There were no words needed, their shared experiences forging a bond that transcended the need for explanations. Michael finally broke free from the throng of well-wishers, his face beaming with pride. He threw his arms around his mother, holding her tight. "I did it, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I did it." Diana returned his embrace, the warmth of his hug melting the icy knot in her stomach. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of applause and the murmur of congratulations, the world felt right again. The accusations, the humiliation, the public spectacle had all faded into the background. All that remained was the fierce, unwavering love for her son and the quiet pride in his accomplishment. The gymnasium, once a stage for her humiliation, had become a testament to her resilience, a symbol of the strength that lay hidden beneath the surface. It was a victory, not just for her, but for all those who carried their battles within, a reminder that even in the darkest of moments, hope and resilience could prevail. The world, it seemed, had an insatiable appetite for stories of injustice rectified. The grainy cell phone video of the confrontation at Fort Campbell, shaky and incomplete as it was, had ignited a digital wildfire. Within hours, it had leapt from obscure social media feeds to mainstream news outlets, each frame dissected, each word scrutinized. The narrative, simplified and amplified, became a lightning rod for discussions about veterans, respect, and the insidious nature of unconscious bias. Chuck Morrison, the older security guard, found himself staring at the screen of his ancient desktop computer, the pixelated image of his own face a stark reminder of his lapse in judgment. He'd replayed the video countless times, each viewing a fresh sting. The way he had hesitated, the doubt that flickered in his eyes before being extinguished by Tony's brash certainty it played on an endless loop in his mind. The weight of his error settled deep in his gut, a cold, uncomfortable knot. He'd spent his life striving for fairness, priding himself on his measured approach, yet in those crucial moments he'd failed. Now, his face was synonymous with prejudice, his actions a symbol of the very thing he despised. He had become a cautionary tale, his failure broadcast for all the world to see. The Fort Campbell incident, initially a local embarrassment, had morphed into a national teaching moment. Chuck, under the stern but understanding guidance of his superiors, had taken the reins of a newly implemented training program. He poured his remorse into meticulously crafted presentations, dissecting the incident frame by frame, explaining the nuances of veteran identification, and emphasizing the importance of respect and sensitivity. His voice, once hesitant and apologetic, gained strength and conviction with each session. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could dedicate his future to ensuring that no other veteran faced the same humiliation. Across town, Tony Ritchie wrestled with his own demons. Younger, more impulsive, he had been the driving force behind the confrontation. The online vitriol directed at him had been relentless, a digital barrage that had chipped away at his confidence, revealing the fragile foundation of his bravado. He saw his reflection in the polished surface of his motorcycle, the image distorted and unfamiliar. Was this the man he wanted to be? The man who judged a book by its cover, who let assumptions dictate his actions? The shame burrowed deep, a gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume him. His apology to Major Johnson, delivered haltingly over the phone, had been a small step, a crack in the wall of his pride. But it wasn't enough. He needed to do more. He found solace and a path to redemption in the local Veterans Affairs office. The initial awkwardness, the hesitant glances from the seasoned veterans, slowly gave way to acceptance, then understanding. He immersed himself in their stories, their struggles, their quiet heroism. He listened, he learned, and he began to understand the true meaning of service and sacrifice. The work was humbling, often menial, but with each act of service, he chipped away at his guilt, replacing it with a growing sense of purpose. For Major Diana Fortress Johnson, the aftermath of the incident was a whirlwind. The public outcry, the overwhelming support from veterans and civilians alike, had thrust her into the unexpected role of spokesperson. The quiet life she had envisioned, attending her son's graduation and fading back into anonymity, was irrevocably altered. She found herself fielding calls from news outlets, giving interviews, attending conferences. The spotlight was uncomfortable, an unwelcome intrusion into her carefully constructed privacy. Yet, with each spoken word, she found a new strength, a quiet resolve. Her story, once a source of personal pain, became a catalyst for change. She spoke not just for herself, but for every veteran who had faced similar disrespect, for every individual who had been judged based on assumptions and stereotypes. Her voice, clear and steady, resonated with a quiet power, a testament to her resilience and her unwavering commitment to justice. 3 weeks after the ceremony, the ripples of the incident continued to spread. Policy changes were being implemented in security protocols across military installations, emphasizing sensitivity, training, and veteran recognition. The story had sparked dialogues in classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms across the country. The image of Major Johnson, standing tall and proud in her uniform, had become an enduring symbol of strength and resilience. On a quiet afternoon, several weeks after the storm had subsided, Major Johnson found herself back at Fort Campbell. This time, she was welcomed, not challenged. Commander Marcus Steele Thompson, his 12 Navy SEALs flanking him like silent sentinels, stood at attention as she approached. "Major Johnson," he greeted, his voice laced with respect. "It's an honor." She met his gaze, a flicker of a smile gracing her lips. "Commander Thompson," she replied, the quiet strength in her voice echoing the sentiment. "The honor is mine." They walked together towards the parade grounds, the setting sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Michael Johnson, her son, stood waiting, his chest adorned with newly pinned insignia. He saluted his mother, his eyes shining with pride. "Major Johnson," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Welcome home." She returned the salute, her heart swelling with a profound sense of peace. The incident, the humiliation, the public scrutiny, it had all been worth it. She had not only vindicated herself, but she had also paved the way for a future where respect and understanding would prevail. The long shadows stretched across the parade grounds, a silent testament to the battles fought and won, both on and off the battlefield. The air was still, heavy with the unspoken words of a story that had resonated far beyond the confines of Fort Campbell. It was a story of courage, of resilience, and of the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome adversity and inspire change.